Now, for more on the latest updates in the Brussels attacks, let's talk more about this. We're joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Cui Hongjian from the China Institute of International Studies, and in Paris we have Joav Toker from the American Graduate School in Paris. Also in Washington, D.C., we're joined by Mr. Raymond Tanter, a former member of the White House staff and professor at the University of Michigan. Welcome to you all. So the latest we've got this is that as raids continue in Brussels, 10 more suspects have been arrested. Professor Toker, what kind of effects of that kind of information have on Belgian citizens, on German citizens, French citizens? Is that a source of relief, or is just another reminder of how serious the terror situation there in Europe?
Well, I would say that a bit earlier during this very painful episode of aggravated terrorism with a lot of casualties in terms of France and Belgium, I'm speaking about a year ago, the first option was the right one. I mean, when police came right away after attacks and victims with the information that there were people arrested and that investigations indeed found out direct elements related to those acts, it gave some sense of relief to most people in France or in Belgium or in Italy. I'm not sure that's the case right now, because those things have been repeated, and perhaps indeed it is now the other way around, or the other version of the same phenomena, namely more suspects are arrested, more information is given out to the public, then the public gets more of a feeling and an overall intuition that the situation could be even harsher, even more dangerous than what already had been estimated as extremely dangerous.
And there's also this fear that multiple plots are in the work across the entire Europe. Let me give Professor Tanter in DC a chance to jump in here. Do you think, given the rising fear of terrorism across entire Europe, or possibly on the U.S. soil, do you think intelligence in the U.S. and in Europe are ready for this?
Yes, intelligence is ready, but for the last scenario. Intelligence has a hard time thinking about a future scenario. You have to have a 9/11-like event, or 7/7-like event in London, 9/11 in America, of course, in order to shake the tree of intelligence so that the good apples come down to the ground. So I'm optimistic that now that you have the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris and the Jewish Museum in Brussels, and then now the latest attacks in Brussels on March 18th through the 22nd, that something will be done for the future.
Mm-hmm. And Professor Cui, the European Police Interpol said that scale of the terror threat is much more extensive than they first fear. What will be, the possible targets? What country or which countries are the most risk now for terror attacks?
Yeah, as we know that now it looks like the terrorism or this terror attack itself, has a huge change, especially. And I think certainly now Europe and more and more European countries become the main target for this terrorism. Mm-hmm. Because as we know now, the problem for European country is there are so many small countries, and of course there is integration. But as we know, still there are so many other challenges, including refugee, migration, everything. Mm-hmm. So I think that for the terrorists now, European countries become a ideal target to be attacked, because as we understand that European countries, they are part of the we call the leading group in the Western countries, and also it's convenient, I think, for the terrorists to enter into Europe and to plan and to impose the terrorism attack. And also, as we understand, because of the public opinion, because of the media. So once there is an attack happen in Europe, there will be a global effect. So I think that's the reason why more and more there will be.
The reason I ask this is because after the Paris attack last November, security experts have been labeling danger zones in Europe, and they said jihadists returning from Syria most likely to conduct plot attacks in 5 Western European countries. There are Belgium, France, Germany, the UK, and the Netherlands. Yeah. And what happened here in Belgium is like seeing your worst fear come to life. Professor Toker, in Paris, do you still agree with that kind of assessment that 5 countries still the most vulnerable targets in Europe?
I wouldn't distinct between those and some other West and Central European countries, but clearly the countries like France, like Britain, like Belgium, and like Italy are extremely exposed because of many reasons. Because of their participation some of them participate in the direct war effort against ISIL on Syrian and Iraqi territories, because almost all of them have some kind of colonial heavy past which is exploited by ISIL and ISIL-affiliated voices for propaganda reasons, and because all that fits the overall strategy of ISIL, which beyond the ambition to hurt, to kill, and to spread murder, has a political, strategic, long-term objective, which is to divide other nations, to divide European nations around the fact that there are large Muslim populations in all these countries, in Britain, in France, in Belgium, in Italy, in Germany, and building up through ISIS rationale, of course, on division within the French nation, within the Belgian unity nation, within Great Britain's solid unity. This is the long-term hope and strategy of ISIL, and it all goes the same way, which designs these countries as indeed a favorable, so to speak, target.
And speaking of strategy, let's talk about this iceberg theory of terrorist plots. Professor Tanter in DC. Now, a U.S. counterterrorism expert, Clint Watts, previously wrote about this theory, saying that for every attacker, there's usually several others helping to facilitate a plot. And what we see is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, my question is, can there be a solution there to expose the rest of the iceberg in such cases?
Well, I think Professor Watt is correct. If there is a cell that has been implanted, there are going to be follow-up arrests, and you're going to have maybe 30 or 40 people involved in this support group helping the person who launched the attack. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if there's a lone wolf, a lone actor who decides to put a knife in someone on the street and he's radicalized himself, then there is no iceberg. In the Charlie Hebdo and Jewish Museum and the attacks over March 18th through the 22nd, you had a situation where there were cells, and so the iceberg idea was vindicated. So I think you have to look at the context of what has happened before you can make an analysis of it.
And in the Brussels case, Belgium has been criticized for failing to prevent Tuesday attacks, intelligence lapses, bungled operations, both failures in security and in intelligence. What can we learn from that, Professor Toker?
Well, we unfortunately can learn some unpleasant feeds. Just on my way to the studio about half an hour ago, I ran into a new investigation which the most prestigious French newspaper, Le Monde, published this afternoon here in Europe, which accuses Belgian police and Belgian special services with a whole long list of failures, of misinterpretations, of confusion, of naivety. Okay, so we've heard those kind of accusations before by outlets of the press as well as by politicians.
Well, do you think that kind of accusations are justifiable?
Well, they certainly are if you look closely at several details of the investigation, but it's so much easier to take sort of an a priori, posteriori look at things and just put, you know, sort of an accusing finger directed at those who are responsible. This is the dream, if I may say so, of all European specialists in terms of intelligence security, to have some kind of, how should I say, a European FBI. We'll have one unit which would regroup the efforts and the data of what is happening all over 28 European Union members and beyond it in the continent. I don't know whether my American colleague on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean would admit that indeed the FBI in the United States is much more efficient than the European services. There may be a debate on that.
Right.
But anyway, this is not the present situation.
Right, Professor Tanter, you have something to say?
Yes, it would be good if there were a European Federal Bureau of Investigation, but Europe is not one country. The United States FBI is part of the United States. And how can you imagine having a European Federal Bureau of Investigation? It's even difficult to coordinate within Belgium. Belgium is a country where the federal police don't really communicate with the local police. And France has its own problems in that respect as well. So, and by the way, it's also after the fact. After the fact, it's very easy to criticize intelligence services, but it's very difficult to anticipate what's going to happen on the next time around.
Professor Tanter, you want to respond to that? The criticism on, you know, the information sharing among governments?
Part of these things is being said publicly. A lot of it is not said publicly and related by press sources, which also have their sort of small rivalities. It is clear and sure, without a close look at every single detail which is part of those investigations, there are large lacunes and there are still large gaps between satisfactory efficiency of these services, let them be in France, in Belgium, in Italy, or in Britain, and what should have been the situation facing this type of challenge. And I'll add that on top of what we have been accustomed, so to speak, more or less over the last 2 years on European soil in terms of terrorist attacks in urban environments, there are new rumors or sources of information which indicate that ISIL terrorists on European grounds and elsewhere are looking for new types of targets. For example, nuclear plants. And indeed, there are some solid elements of information coming from Belgium and the Netherlands this time over the last week or so, that actually that was indeed what one of the terrorists, which had later on been killed in Belgium, was trying to do, and just did not do that because found it too difficult. But what should that mean in terms of what may expect the European continent or other continents tomorrow or the day after tomorrow?
Well, world leaders have agreed on one thing, is that the Syrian crisis must be solved if the world wants to see ISIL threat eradicated. Mr. Cui here, I think the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has visited Russia, and that the two countries have agreed to accelerate, you know, the Syrian peace talk. Will the attack on Belgium push for Western countries to make further efforts toward peace in Syria?
Yeah, indeed, in a logical way in general, the answer is yes, because there will be more pressure, especially as we say that on Belgian government now, or maybe tomorrow or future, on other European countries' government say that you should do something more. You should have some more international cooperation, especially with your alliance, United States, like that. But the problem is, if we look at this situation now in Syria, we can find out, very, very big games between those big players. So indeed, now on this issue of counterterrorism, we do have some more and more common interests. We do have some more common goals. But when those big players, including Russia, United States, if you just ask them, okay, please, to help the solution of Syria situation, and then we can have a good environment to fight against ISIL like that. But at that time, I think for Russia, for United States, they will have their own consideration about how this geopolitical interests for itself, and once there is a stable Syria, what will happen for Russia, for United States? So I'm a little bit pessimistic, say that, okay, even there are more and more pressure from these demands for, to fight against terrorism, but for those big players, it's difficult for them to get some more cooperation.
Professor Tanter from DC there. Give us your perspective on this.
Yes. I would say that Iran, more than Russia, is the key to unlocking the door of the stalled peace process with respect to Syria, but not by bringing Iran into the talks, because Iran is the problem. It's because of Tehran that Assad is being propped up. And one has to, I think, double down on Iran with respect to sanctions and threats of regime change from within, not some kind of Iraqi-type invasion, but by recognizing the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the only group that opposes the clerical regime and has the legitimacy to bring about political change, peaceful political change in Iran. So that's what's necessary, that Iran be targeted by the Western countries in order to save Syria. That's the name of my next book, by the way.
Final remarks coming from Professor Toker from Paris. You know, this phenomenon we're seeing, it's being reported that Belgium has sent more foreign fighters to Syria than any other countries in Europe. That's per capita, I mean, I've been saying. Why is Belgium such a hotbed for jihad? I mean, what can be done here to prevent such cases from happening again?
Well, it is due to some past chapters in Belgium history, and in a background sort of profound way, which makes it Belgium has a very large Muslim affiliated population, and proportionally speaking is #1 in the continent, which is a Muslim affiliated population amongst all European countries, and also unfortunately has very large number of French citizens, of French residents who have done the trip to Syria and Iraq and have been trained and are on the way back perhaps to Europe to commit either suicidal or terrorist acts in Europe. Beyond the background-oriented reasons, there are also some kind of operational streams, which makes that Belgium, for example, is a small country. Wherever you are in Belgium, you're never far away, more than 1 hour ride from a border. So it's so easy to operate there if what you're tuned into is this kind of terrorist activity.
Okay, thank you. We're running out of time, but appreciate your insights. Mr. Cui Hongjian joining us from Beijing, and Professor Toker joining us from Paris, also Professor Tanter joining us from Washington, D.C. Appreciate it.